Hello again. Nice to be here with you. Today we're going to be looking at a wonderful and exciting topic. As usual, before we go into this topic, there is actually a question that runs through my mind, or actually is going through my mind. And I would like to ask you, and I wish seriously you can give me a feedback on your response towards this particular question. The question is, why reproductive females attain menopause? Why reproductive females attain menopause? And I believe, as much as most of you know, menopause actually talks about a certain time or age in a woman where she actually ceases to release mature eggs. And what are actually the reasons behind this? If you do a comparison with the female reproductive system and that of the male reproductive system, a male, even at old age, can still produce mature sperm cells, but a female at old age or at a certain age do not produce mature egg cell. Now, very important, I want you to understand this. I think this is my own suggestion. I believe that when a woman or a female child is actually born, her ovaries contain what we call potential egg cells, or we can also call them primary oocysts. They contain primary oocysts. Now, however, at a certain age, like I just mentioned, an active reproductive female stops producing mature egg cells. Now, this is simply, I believe, because her active reproductive life is supposed to produce mature eggs between, I think, 400 to 500 egg cells. That is, at her reproductive life, she's supposed to release up to 400 or 500 egg cells. And if she has actually completely exhausted the release of up to 500 mature egg cells in her entire reproductive life, it becomes a very big problem, or actually it results into menopause. It actually results into menopause. And that is why you can't actually pinpoint the exact age a woman is supposed to attain menopause. So many persons say it is between, or I think from the age of 40 and upward, a woman attains menopause. It is simply because in her active reproductive life, she is supposed to release about 400 to 500 mature egg cells. And if she has done that within that period, then menopause sets in. I want us to still dig in more, we're not going to be discussing only the female reproductive sex cell. We're also going to be looking at the male reproductive sex cell. And today we're going to be looking at an exciting topic, which I also still call reproductive system in mammals, part 2. But in this particular topic on reproductive system 2 in mammals, we are going to be looking at the sex cells. We're going to be talking about the male gametes, which is also known as the male sex cell or reproductive sex cell. We're also going to be looking at the female reproductive sex cell. And then we're also going to be looking at the production of egg and what we call the menstrual cycle. And then we'll see some differences between the male and the female gametes. If I take your mind back, we actually have discussed reproductive system in mammals 1, where we actually were looking at the reproductive organs. And I told you that the reproductive organs, that is what we call gonads. Now, gonads are actually organs that produce or secrete what we call sex cells or gametes, as well as hormones or sex hormones. And I told you in mammals, we have 2 gonads. We have what we call the testis, which is found in male, and then we have the ovaries, which is actually found in female. And I also said that the female or the male gonad, which is the testis, actually produces the male gamete, which is called the male sex cell, and it is spermatozoa, or you can call it the sperm cell. So it produces the sperm cell, which is the male gamete, and also the male sex hormone, which is called the testosterone. And we said that the testosterone is actually responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics, mostly in males. And then we talked about the female gonad, which is the ovary. The ovary is the female gonad. And the female gonad secretes or produces the female sex cell, which we're going to be looking at, and the female sex cell is called the egg cell. It also produces the female sex hormone, which is responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics in females. And these hormones are the estrogen and the progesterone. Now, quickly, before we continue this discussion, there are specific objectives. And by specific objectives, I simply mean that by the end of this particular topic, you should be able to at least explain one or two things pertaining to what we have discussed in this topic. Now, let's take a look at one of them. One, you should be able to describe the male reproductive cell. The male reproductive cell, or you can call it the male gamete. And number two, you should be able to describe the female reproductive cell, or the female gamete. And then number three, you should be able to briefly explain the production of eggs and also the menstrual cycle. Be able to explain it. And then number four, you should be able to state some similarities as well as differences, but mostly differences between the male and the female gamete. The male and the female gamete. Now, quickly, let's talk about the mammalian gametes. I repeat again, I said before that the mammalian gametes or gametes are simply referred to as reproductive sex cells. Gametes are referred to as reproductive sex cells. And these gametes are formed and produced by gonads. They are formed and produced by gonads. And I've said before, we have two types of gonads. We have the testes, and then we have the ovaries. Now, one of the most important things you should take note of is a term we call gametogenesis. Gametogenesis. Now, what is gametogenesis? Now, gametogenesis is actually the process by which gametes are being formed. Now, it is easy for you to actually discover or to remember the definition for gametogenesis. Gametes, talking about the sex cells, reproductive sex cell. Genesis talks about the beginning. So you can, of course, the beginning talks about how something is being formed, how things are being formed or created. So you put that two together, you get the definition for gametogenesis. It's actually the process by which gametes are being formed. Process by which gametes are being formed and, if possible, produced. Okay? All right. Now, we're going to be looking at the two main types of gametes. The first one we're going to be talking about is the male gamete. The male gamete. And I've told you before, the male gamete can also be called spermatozoa, or we can call it the sperm cells. The sperm cells. Now, the male gametes are produced by the testes. If you go back to some of our videos, or if you go back to our video in reproductive system in mammals, I specifically told you the particular place in the testes where these sperm cells are being produced. And we call that the seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules in the testes actually produces the sperm cells, or actually produces spermatozoa. Now, the process by which the testis produces spermatozoa, or forms and produces spermatozoa, is what we call spermatogenesis. So spermatogenesis is the process by which sperm cells are being formed and produced. Okay? All right. Now, also note that apart from the seminiferous tubules producing the sperm cells, there is also another cell located within the testes that is actually responsible for the production of testosterone. Remember, I told you that testosterone, they are responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics in males. Those developments, those characteristics one notices during puberty is controlled by the testosterone. However, the cell that actually produces the testosterone inside of the testis is called the interstitial cells. The interstitial cells. So please take note, the interstitial cells produces the testosterone, while the seminiferous tubules, all located within the testis, produces the sperm cells. Now quickly, let's take a look at the structure of the male gamete. The structure of the male gamete. Now, if you put your eyes on the screen, you are actually going to see the structure of the male gamete. Now, very briefly, the structure of the male gamete is divided into three compartments or into three portions. Now, the male gamete is divided into head, well, we can call it neck, but middle piece, and then the tail. So the male gamete has a head, it has a middle piece, and then it has a tail. Now, in some textbooks, you are going to see a neck. Now, the neck is actually a junction between that separates the head from the middle piece. Now, what is actually found in the middle piece? In the head? Like I said, the male gamete, it consists of a head, it consists of a middle piece, and then it consists of a tail. Now, what makes up the head of the sperm cell? The sperm cell, the head of the sperm cell, it's made up of what we call the acrosome and the nucleus. It is made up of the acrosome. It is also made up of the nucleus. Now, the acrosome plays a major role, which we're going to be looking at in the subsequent, as we continue this discussion. But also, let's move to the middle piece. The middle piece contains or is made up of organelles, cell organelles, which are the powerhouse of the cell. And in fact, it is made up of what? The mitochondria. I repeat, the head is made up of the acrosome as well as the nucleus, while the middle piece is made up of the mitochondria. Now we talked about the head of the sperm cells, and we said it is made up of the acrosome as well as the nucleus. Let's take a look at what the acrosome is all about. Now, the acrosome, like we've already mentioned, is located at the head of the sperm cell, and it contains what we call lytic enzymes, or you can call it a hydrolytic enzymes. Now, what is the function of these lytic enzymes, which actually gives the functions of the acrosome? The lytic enzyme actually enhances the penetration of the sperm cells into the egg during fertilization. Now, the reason for allowing or penetration of the sperm cells into the egg during fertilization is so that the nucleus of the sperm cell can fuse with that of the egg cell, which will result in the development or the formation of a zygote. Okay, so what does the acrosome do? It dissolves the egg membrane. It dissolves the egg membrane so as to allow the sperm cell penetrate into the egg cells during fertilization. So that is one of the major functions of the acrosome. The next is the nucleus. Now, the nucleus plays also a very important role. The nucleus aids the formation of a zygote. It is the nucleus that contains hereditary materials which fuses with the nucleus, which contains also hereditary materials of the female sex cell. So once there is a fusion of these gametes or the nucleus of these gametes, then we can say fertilization has actually occurred. And if fertilization or fusion of the nucleus of the sperm cell and that of the egg cell is successful, a zygote is also formed. Okay, so that is also the major function of the nucleus. It carries hereditary materials which fuses with the nucleus of the female sex cell to form a zygote. Now, the next one we talked about was the mitochondria. The mitochondria. We said the mitochondria is actually located at the middle piece. Remember, we said that the sperm cell consists of a head, it consists of a middle piece, and then it consists of a tail. So the middle piece possesses or contains mitochondria. Now, mitochondria, one of the nicknames it has been given is that it is called the powerhouse of the cell. Now, why is it called the powerhouse of the cell? It's because that is the organelle through which cellular respiration occurs, and her energy, great amount of energy is being produced and released, okay? So the sperm cell needs energy to swim to the egg cells. And this energy is actually produced from the mitochondria. So one of the major functions of the mitochondria is to produce energy which the sperm cell needs to swim to the egg cell. And don't forget, the mitochondria is located at the middle piece. Mitochondria is actually located at the middle piece. Now, we have also mentioned that of the nucleus. The next one is the tail. The tail. The sperm cell also consists of the tail. In some books, you will see it referred to as the flagellum. So even if you're labeling it the flagellum or the tail, you are correct in all of your answers, or in whichever way you call it. You can call it the tail, you can call it the flagellum. Now, the tail or the flagellum is made up of plasma membrane. And this plasma membrane actually helps the sperm cell to move, okay? It helps the sperm cells to move towards the egg cell. Remember that the flagellum is an organelle for movement in most cells. It is an organelle not just for movement, but for locomotion. So it helps to locomote. It helps to propel the sperm cell forward in order to meet with the egg cell. So these are what makes up the structure of the sperm cell, okay? Now quickly, let's look at that of the egg cell. Now, the female gamete is called the egg, or you can call it the ovum. The egg or the ovum. Now, each ovum is about 0.1 millimeter thick in diameter, okay? And the thickness of the egg is about 0.1 millimeter thick. So it is very small, but it is very visible. You can still see it. It's visible to the human eyes, but it is actually small. But when you are comparing it with that of the sperm cells are actually small, cannot be seen except with the aid of a microscope. Now, another important thing you should take note of about the female gamete is that the process by which the female gamete is being produced or formed and produced is what we call oogenesis. Oogenesis, okay? Oogenesis is the process by which the female gametes is being formed and produced from the ovary. Now, quickly, let's look at the structure of the female gamete. Structure of the female gamete. Now, you can see the structure of the female gamete. It possesses what we call the zona pellucida. It consists of the nucleus. You can see the membrane surrounding the egg cell, which must be dissolved by the acrosome so that the head of the sperm cell can actually fit in or enter into the egg cell so that the nucleus can fuse with that of the nucleus of what? The egg cell. All right. Now, quickly, let's look at some of the things that make up the egg cell. Now, we have the nucleus. One of the things we just saw there is the nucleus. Now, the nucleus is actually rich in DNA, like I said before, which is a genetic material. When we talked about that of the male sperm cells, we said that it has DNA. The female sex cell or egg cell also have DNA, and these DNA have to fuse in order for fertilization to actually take place. So fertilization is actually completed when the nucleus from the sperm cell fuses successfully with that of the egg cell. The next thing you're also going to spot out or see in the female sex cell or reproductive sex cell, which is the egg cell, is the yolk. The yolk. Now, the yolk actually provides nourishment for the embryo, especially at the early stage of development. I'm talking about the stage when the embryo has not been implanted into the uterus, okay? When implantation has not yet taken place. We're looking at the early stage when fertilization has just occurred. For the zygote to actually develop into an embryo, and for the embryo to also develop before it gets attached or implanted into the walls of the uterus, it needs nourishment from the yolk. And the yolk is part of the female egg cell, right? Then we also talked about the cytoplasm. If you go back to the structure of the female egg cell, you're going to see the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm, like I said, is surrounded by membrane. And this membrane must be dissolved by the acrosome in order for the head of the sperm cell to actually fit in or enter into the egg cell. Now, these membrane that surrounds the egg cell, they are referred to as the outer membrane and as well as the inner membrane. The outer membrane is called the vitelline membrane, while the inner membrane is referred to as the plasma membrane, Also, lastly, the female egg cell possesses what we call jelly coat. It possesses jelly coat. Now, one of the major functions of the one of the things about the jelly coat is that it surrounds the outside of the ovum, the outside of the egg cell. It surrounds it. It is actually made up of what we call glycoprotein, a combination of both glycogen, which is a form of carbohydrates, and then also a protein. So it is made up of, the jelly coat is actually made up of glycoprotein. Now, next for us to discuss is we're going to be looking at the menstrual cycle. We're going to see how egg production occurs, okay, in most female organisms. But before we go into this discussion, I want us to actually look at this. When a female is actually born, I mentioned this when we began, that her ovaries contain all potential egg cells. They contain all potential egg cells, primary oocysts. And in fact, there are about 200,000 oocysts or potential egg cells in each ovary. And we have two ovaries, or the female mammal or animal has two ovaries, mostly if we're taking humans into consideration. Okay, they have two ovaries, and each ovary can release about 200,000 potential egg cells. However, only 400 to 500 develop actually into maturity during a female's active reproductive life. And this female active reproductive life actually begins at puberty and then ends at what? Menopause. All right. Now, in the human female, egg production begins at puberty, but it ends at what? Menopause. And I have told you why it ends at menopause. Okay. Now, let's move quickly to how eggs are being released, okay, for fertilization monthly. I told you it is done monthly. Now, please note, let me state it again. Egg release, the release of eggs by a female or by a mature female is done monthly, okay? It is done monthly, and also it is done cyclic. It's not just a one-time event. It's not a one-time issue. It is something that continues over and over again monthly. And like we said before, it begins at puberty and then ends at menopause. Now, what are the stages that are involved for egg release or production? Number one, the production of the ovum in the ovaries. Remember, we said about 400 to 500 eggs, mature eggs, are being released by the ovaries. So the first thing you notice is that the ovaries actually produce these egg cells. And after when it has actually produced these egg cells mature. So maturation of the ovum is still in the ovaries. It simply means that the egg cell, they are produced in the ovary, and they gain maturity, or they become mature still at the ovaries. Now, while this egg cell is actually getting mature or becoming mature, the uterine walls, that is the walls of the uterus, which is the womb, becomes thickened. Now, why is it getting thickened? It is actually preparing for implantation. Okay, that is, if the egg cell is fertilized, then it becomes a zygote, and then from a zygote it develops to an embryo, and when it develops into an embryo, it is then implanted at the uterine walls, okay, or you can call it the uterine endometrium. So it is implanted there, and that is why the uterine walls and the uterine endometrium starts preparing itself consciously to receive a fertilized egg, okay, so it becomes thickened. All right. Now, after that process, the next thing that happens is that the eggs, or the mature eggs, are then released from the ovary to the fallopian tube. There at the fallopian tube, the eggs will remain to be fertilized by a sperm cell. Now, if no sperm cell comes to fertilize the egg at the fallopian tube, the eggs break. Okay, there will be a breakdown of the exterior uterine endometrium tissue, okay, and also the egg will break off. All right, so there will be a breakdown of the extra uterine endometrium tissue if fertilization of the ovum and implantation of the embryo do not occur. And that is what most women see, or most female see, as a discharge of blood, which they call the menstrual flow, once every month. Okay, they see it once every month. Now, this activity takes 28 days to complete, and it is known as the menstrual cycle. It completes at 28 days. So that is how menstrual flow actually occur. And remember, I said it is something that happens monthly, and it is something that happens cyclic. It is not just a one-time experience. It is actually an experience that continues over and over again. Okay, now we also have differences between male and female gametes. Differences between male and female gametes. Now, let's take a look at some differences between the male gamete and the female gamete. Number one, now, the male gamete is motile, like we just said. It can move from one place to another. It can move from the male reproductive system and then move into the female reproductive system. But if we compare it with that of the female reproductive system, the female reproductive system is not motile. So it is the male reproductive system is motile. Sorry, male reproductive sex cell is motile, but that of the female is not motile. Number two is that the sperm cells, they are visible. They are not visible to the naked eyes, but the female or the egg cells, they are actually visible to the naked eyes. Number three is that the sperm cells, they possess a head. Remember, we said they have a head, they have a middle piece, and then they have a tail. So they possess a head, but the egg cells do not possess a head. Now, another thing, again, difference you will note between the sperm cells and the egg cell is that the egg cells or the sperm cells do not have yolk. So yolk is absent. But in the female, in the egg cell, yolk is present. Also in the sperm cell, the vitelline membrane, which is the outer membrane, is present. An outer membrane is not present in the sperm cell, but it is present in the egg cell. Another major difference between the sperm cell and the egg cell is that the sperm cell, there is presence of flagellum or tail. Okay, if you look at the structure, there is presence of flagellum or a tail, but in the egg cell, there is no flagellum and no tail. And then finally, in the sperm cell, there is acrosome. Acrosome is present. Remember, we said the acrosome, they enable or enhances penetration of the for the sperm cell into the egg cell, and it contains lytic enzymes. So in the sperm cell, you have the acrosome, but in the egg cell, there is an absence of acrosome. So this is where we're going to call it actually a wrap up on this particular class. But before we go, I would like us to see some few questions using the exam guide, past questions probably. Let's take a look at this one first. All right. though we're not actually looking at the male reproductive system, but let's see how we can answer this particular question. They said an illustration of human male reproductive system is shown beside. Which of the labeled parts can be cut to ensure permanent sterility? Now, when we're talking about permanent sterility, it simply means that the person or the male figure might not, in fact, not might not, will never be able to pregnant or fertilize any egg. And because for fertilization to actually take place, there must be ejaculation of the sperm cells out of the body. And one of the channels or the ducts or tunnels through which ejaculation actually takes place is the urethra. So if the urethra is actually severed, if the sperm duct rather is actually severed, it can bring about a permanent sterility. And the sperm duct, I think that is the part labeled Roman figure 2. That's the part labeled Roman figure 2. Now, why is it not Roman figure 1? Remember, we said that that's the urethra rather, and Roman figure 1 is actually the urethra, and we said the urethra is a urinogenital. So if you sever it, it means that the person will not be able to pass out as urine, which is excretory product, and the person also may not, in fact, will not be able to pass out sperm cells. Okay, and that's a very dangerous one. All right, so the one that just for only permanent sterility and not for preventing excretion, okay, is what the seminal vesicle, the vas deferens, which is the sperm duct. That's the sperm duct. Okay. Now, the next thing again for us to look at, another question is, okay, they gave us a question that has to do with the sperm cells, the structure of the sperm cells. Now, they said the function of the part labeled 2. Function of the part labeled 2 is for what? Now, look at the part labeled 2, that is the tail. One of the major functions of the tail is to help the sperm cell to swim forward. So our correct option is what? C. Our correct option is C. The next one is the question we have here. They said the part labeled 1. I think the part labeled 1, we've mentioned this before, that is the acrosome. That is the acrosome. Now, before we also go, let's take a look at one more question. I think I want to take a theory question in this perspective. Let's look at a theory question here that has to do with that has to do with the sperm cell. Now, you see this question, they said, make a large labeled diagram 8 to 10 cm long of human spermatozoa to show its structure, to show the structure. Now, we have just seen the structure of the sperm cells, and please take note when drawing your diagrams. Please ensure that you take note of your title, you take note of the size they ask you to draw, like we can see here, it is 8 to 10 cm. You should also take note of neatness of lines, you take note of clarity of lines, and when labeling, ensure that your labels are all horizontal, and it is done with a ruler. Horizontal and done with a ruler. Okay, now also note that when labeling, you should note that the head consists of what? The acrosome and the nucleus, while the middle piece consists of the mitochondria, and then we also have a tail. All right, now the next important thing again to take note, I think that should be the last question, that state one function each of any 3 organelles found in the spermatozoa. Now, the spermatozoa consists of the acrosome. We have mentioned that the function of the acrosome is to enhance penetration of the sperm cells into the egg cell by dissolving the egg membrane, the membranes surrounding the egg cell. We also talked about the nucleus. We said the nucleus is actually an organelle that contains DNA, and this DNA, they contain genetic materials or hereditary materials. And these hereditary materials fuses with that of the female and then give rise to a new individual, which is called the zygote. And then finally, we also have the mitochondria, which we said is the powerhouse of the cell. It generates energy, which the sperm cell needs to swim to the egg cell. And then we also talk about the tail, which contains plasma membrane, and this tail enables the sperm cell to swim, to propel the sperm cell forward towards the egg cell. So this is where we call it a wrap-up in this particular class on reproductive system in mammals part 2, which has to do with the structure of gametes. Okay. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.